After my last Hunter Avallone video, which was great by the way, you guys should definitely watch it, it's amazing, elegant, and beautiful in every way, I started to receive tips or links from people like I would normally do after I cover a specific subject or specific topic on this channel. Now normally when I get these links, they're basically videos that are like the exact same thing about the exact same person, so I kind of put them off and don't really do response videos to them because I don't want to keep repeating the same exact topics and people over and over again on this channel. However, this one was special because I got linked an unlisted debate between a woman named Lisa and Hunter Avallone on Breonna Taylor and systemic racism versus black people. Now, I'm not exactly sure why this debate is unlisted on Hunter Avallone's channel. It could just be that he has a policy of whenever he does a live stream, he later unlists said live stream and thus nobody can see it again. However, it's incredibly unfortunate that it is unlisted because the Lisa person did a fantastic job debating Hunter Avallone, and watching this video gave me a ton of joy, which is why I'm going to link Lisa's social media stuff in the description of my video, and I'm definitely going to recommend that you go follow her on Twitter, on Instagram, and wherever else you might find her. That's where I found her so far. If you find her other places, just follow her. Definitely not in person though, but on social media, sure, don't totally follow her. No problem right there. Now I can break this debate down into two distinct parts. The first one is obvious. It's the title of this video, or somewhere in the title of this video, is the Breonna Taylor segment of this video, where Hunter Avallone throws out a lot of ridiculous assertions related to the Breonna Taylor case that are in no way rooted in fact. And the second portion of this is the paternalistic racist segment of the debate, where Hunter Avallone basically removes all agency, accountability, and responsibility from Black Americans who commit crimes in favor of a narrative that basically says white people are controlling their lives and they're all Aladdin. Now, I could cover that in a second video. It's depending on how this video is received and what you guys think in the comments. But first, we have to get into this Breonna Taylor case video because the sheer number of wrong things in this video is absolutely absurd, and while Lisa did a great job, there are some things that I definitely want to point out about Hunter's statements that are just inaccurate, and embarrassingly so. And the first and most obvious is this idea that Kenneth Walker was not a drug dealer, which Hunter Avallone admits that he is, despite saying that it's not relevant, therefore he isn't, and he keeps circular backtracking on this issue, even though the evidence is clear. Listen for yourself.
This was one I really heavily disagreed with you on, but I also understand that there's a lot of like misinformation going around about this issue. So I want to give you a chance to clarify before I like tell you why I disagree. It's the tweet where you said her drug dealer boyfriend fired first at police. My point really just should end there. Police were serving a no-knock warrant and they knocked anyway. What is so difficult to understand here? What's the point of this tweet then? Also, you said he was a drug dealer, which is not true either.
No, there actually was some proof there that he was also involved in the drug trade.
No,
So
there was what happened was information came out later that suggested he may have been selling pills or something, which was completely unrelated to the narcotics
yeah, it was
investigation.
unrelated to the case, but he's still a drug dealer. Like
Okay, but that's
So this is just intro to stupidity in terms of what Hunter Avallone is attempting to argue in relation to the Breonna Taylor case, even though it is clearly demonstrable that Kenneth Walker was in fact a drug dealer. Now, he wasn't as big a drug dealer from what we can tell from his cell phone as Jamarcus Glover, who was the centerpiece of the investigation, but it's clearly evident that he was in fact a drug dealer. Now, this had nothing to do with the warrant on Kenneth Walker's house, which I think is what Hunter is trying to use to absolve him of actually being a drug dealer, but it is interesting that both of Breonna Taylor's boyfriends had the same profession, or at least had this part of the profession in common, that they were drug dealers dating Breonna Taylor. But Hunter can't let that go because he needs to defend them on basically everything, even though it can be true that Kenneth Walker didn't have a criminal record, wasn't convicted of a crime, the raid had nothing to do with his drug dealing, and the cops didn't even know he was there, let alone that he was a drug dealer, while at the same time he was likely a small-time drug dealer based on the evidence in his phone.
by
The
writing
next
first of all, by
level-
writing the boyfriend off as a drug dealer, that's factually incorrect. He literally doesn't have a criminal record. So if you so we have
people don't have criminal records don't make them not drug
yeah,
dealers.
so wait. First of all, you're lying by saying he's a drug dealer. That's just
I'm not
factually
lying.
incorrect.
There was evidence that he was selling prescription medicine.
But
That's
that
a
wasn't
drug
but
deal.
no, but that was irrelevant. Like the cops didn't even know
Not
that at the
irrelevant.
time.
If there's evidence of you, even after the fact, selling drugs, you are a drug dealer. Am I wrong?
I don't think that that has any relevance in the fact
Well, but you
when
just
they were
told
raiding
you just
wait, when they
said
were
that I was doing the same
when
thing
when they were
where
raiding
he
his
was
home,
proven guilty. I
when
mean,
they
there's evidence that he did that, that he's a drug
later,
dealer.
that came out later. Like it had that the cops didn't even know that when they were breaking into the house.
Now, Lisa did a good job calling him out for dancing around the topic of Kenneth Walker being a drug dealer and this being provable by the contents of his cell phone, and I give her credit for that. But again, this is just the beginning of wrong, inaccurate, and outright stupid things that Hunter Avallone is going to assert about this case. The next being is this idea that there are 11 witnesses that contradict the testimony of one witness, so that there's basically a consensus that the police did not announce themselves, which is absolutely ridiculous, and I'm going to explain why after Hunter talks about the consensus.
Either way, the point of the tweet was when you fire on police, whether you think it's justified or not, they're on the other side of the door. They don't know what you think. All they know is they're being shot at. So
Mhm.
they are totally justified in
So who's in
shooting
the
back.
so do you but like the police didn't even acknowledge that they were police.
From some accounts, they say that they
The
said that they were.
consensus of the accounts, yes. There was one witness that said they heard them shout police.
Either
11
way,
others said they didn't.
either way, would you?
Now, the fact that the left has been able to spread such misinformation about these supposedly 11 people that contradict the testimony of the one person who heard the police announce themselves to Kenneth Walker is absolutely ridiculous. Because when you look at the position of all of these alleged witnesses, you realize that the one who heard the police was the only one in a position to actually hear the police announce, and thus it makes perfect sense that people during a raid that took place after midnight that were in their apartments asleep would not hear voices, but they would be awoken to gunshots or a battering ram breaking down the door. Remember, on the warrant, because people used to say that this was the wrong house and a no-knock warrant and all that ridiculous nonsense, there's a picture of Breonna Taylor's front door. And you can see in that picture, there's a staircase that you use to get to the apartments above the apartments that Breonna Taylor was at. The person who heard the police and saw the police was actually walking up the staircase when he took note of the fact that the police were there. And the police told him that he needed to get inside because they were conducting business. Now, according to his testimony, after having this interaction with the police, he went up into the apartment and then was looking out the window and listening to see what was going on the entire time. Now, you contrast that to the 11 other witnesses. Some of them lived on the opposite side of the apartment complex, who were likely asleep or doing something else and weren't aware of the fact that there was police presence. You come to realize that this was the only person in position that was actually listening to what was going on because he knew what was going on. So the other witnesses that say that they only heard the knocking, which is louder than the voices, or only heard the gunshots, which was louder than the knocking, are not necessarily reliable or as reliable as the person who was actively listening to hear what was going on. Now, I'm going to use the analogy of somebody chopping down a tree, and there are three sounds that are key in this analogy. The first is the voice. Somebody is going to yell timber when the tree is coming down. There's also a chainsaw, which is being utilized to cut down the tree, which is louder than the person yelling, and the loudest sound is the tree falling after it's cut down. Now, what Hunter Avallone is basically saying is that there's one witness who happens to be the only witness close enough to hear the words timber that heard them say timber, but there were these much further witnesses away that couldn't hear that, and some of them couldn't even hear the chainsaw and only heard the tree falling down, and therefore we need to take the 11 people who were not in a position to hear the lowest sounds, word for it, over the one person who is definitely, inarguably, in that position's word. Absolutely ridiculous. It makes no sense. The value of these 11 witnesses saying that they didn't hear the voice is just as valuable as you or I, who are probably in different states, saying that we didn't hear the voices, because like us, they were just too far away. And remember, a lot of people are arguing, and the police aren't even disputing that Kenneth Walker inside the home didn't hear the voices. That's why Kenneth Walker's not being charged with the crime. So, if it stands to reason that the voices could have not been loud enough for Kenneth Walker to hear, evident by the fact that they're not charging Kenneth Walker with a crime, then it's definitely logical on the house that they weren't shouting directly in front of, across the apartment complex, that nobody else, again, after 12 o'clock at midnight, heard these voices. So the idea that it's 11 against 1 is complete and utter nonsense. A lot of these people, I'm sure, didn't hear the police call out and identify that they were the police. but you can't hear somebody not say anything. And there's a big difference between I didn't hear it and I definitely heard them not say it. And nobody is saying that because you can't make that case. Now, if that wasn't ridiculous enough, there's another thing that Hunter Avallone consistently brings up despite the fact that it is in no way rooted in fact. And that's this idea that the officer lied on the affidavit about the mail that Breonna Taylor was receiving.
If there was reason, why did they have to lie on the affidavit? The
I,
detective lied under oath to obtain that warrant. Even the
no, no,
judge
no,
who
no,
signed off is uncomfortable about this now.
that hasn't been actually proven that every single point on the warrant was
Not
like
every it doesn't have to be every single point. The fact that he
sure.
lied under oath about that she was getting suspicious mail,
Listen, like
it's
that
the
is
entire
and
situation. The fact that they obtained this warrant on false pretense, and
that
then like they got the warrant under false pretense for the
that's not
viewers.
proven yet. That's
Yeah,
got
no. It's been proven. The actually let me pull this up right here because I want the audience to know about this too. Um, they claimed that the detective wrote that he then verified through a U.S. postal inspector that Glover had been receiving packages at Taylor's address, but the U.S. postal inspector later said that they didn't use his office and that they'd gone through a different agency and that they'd found that there was actually no suspicious mail going to that home. So that was a lie. They lied on the affidavit to obtain the warrant.
Yeah, no, this is just not true. It's complete and total nonsense. The police never said definitively that Breonna Taylor was receiving drugs through these packages. In fact, they didn't even argue this tangentially. What the officer said about Jamarcus Glover, the drug dealer at the centerpiece of this investigation, receiving his mail at Breonna Taylor's household, was that this was another layer in the connection that they were establishing between Breonna Taylor and Jamarcus Glover. Remember, the reason they decided to target Breonna Taylor's house had nothing to do with her receiving mail from Jamarcus Glover. This was just additional information in order to secure the warrant. The reason that they were targeting Breonna Taylor specifically, remember, her name and social security number and a picture of her front door is on the warrant, is because she was seen with Jamarcus Glover, her longtime associate who she bailed out of jail multiple times, going to and from the trap houses at the center of the investigation. They suspected that Glover, who was seen with Breonna Taylor going into these places, grabbing packages, again, this isn't the mail, these are separate packages, loading them into Breonna Taylor's car, driving them to Breonna Taylor's house, and then bringing them into the apartment, was using Breonna Taylor's home to stash either drugs or money inside. Now, the theory that Breonna Taylor's home was being used to store either drugs or drug money is supported by multiple pieces of evidence laid out in the search warrant. The Jamarcus Glover receiving his mail at her house is ancillary to establish that among all the apartments in that complex, that's the most likely one that Glover had an association with. But the most damning piece of evidence is Jamarcus Glover, Breonna Taylor's other boyfriend, the one that was the drug dealer at the centerpiece of this investigation, outright saying on recording from a prison phone call that Breonna Taylor has $8,000 of his money in her apartment.
So where your money at?
You gonna stay there?
Yeah, I'm gonna stay.
You said where my
Right.
money is?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go through the. Well, you know I'm gonna go through the cure right now. I'm not trying to hide nothing from you or nothing. For like you know I'm gonna go through the most about my money. Like that
What?
shit was. Shit, what you mean? Like Bree had like $8,000. And I still got money.
Bree had $8,000 of your money.
Yeah.
Did she tell you where it was?
The amount of evidence that you have to ignore to make the claim that Breonna Taylor had no possible clue that her long-term boyfriend Jamarcus Glover was involved in drug dealing is absolutely staggering. And honestly, in order to make this case, you have to pretend that Breonna Taylor is literally incapable of learning new things about people she spends a lot of time with. 4 years prior to this, Breonna Taylor lent Jamarcus Glover a rental car. That rental car ended up with a dead body in it. You think Breonna Taylor didn't have some questions for Jamarcus about how a dead body ended up in that car? Obviously, she knew what was going on. Jamarcus Glover was arrested multiple times on drug-related charges and violent charges, and Breonna Taylor was the one called in order to bail him out multiple times with cash that this unemployed man seemingly had an abundance of. Again, you have to make the case that Breonna Taylor was completely and utterly ignorant of everything that went around her and was incapable of learning new things for her not to know what Jamarcus Glover was up to. It's insanity. This is why I gave the New York Times so much credit for their documentary on the Breonna Taylor case. Obviously, the New York Times is incredibly left-leaning. Obviously, the New York Times wants to feed you what you want to hear if you're a lefty audience about the Breonna Taylor case. But they don't do that. They're definitely on Breonna Taylor's side throughout the course of the documentary, but the evidence in there is actually solid, and you learn by watching it that Breonna Taylor was intimately involved with this drug dealer. And the only out that the New York Times tries to give Breonna Taylor to that fact, because it's undeniable, is that a week or 2 weeks before on Facebook, she updated her relationship status and made it seem like she was going with Kenneth Walker, even though she was dating both of these men for multiple years and flip-flopping between the two.
What you're saying right now is actually really dangerous. You're suggesting that if somebody dates a criminal or if somebody associates with a criminal, that they are then justified in being murdered.
No, I'm saying you increase. I never said that it's justified. I said you increase your odds. So be careful with how you're using
I
my words.
agree that it might increase your odds, but
Your
that's
odds.
okay. But
So your
so do you
decision-
acknowledge then that what happened with Breonna
decision-making
Taylor was
and
wrong?
your behavior matters, is what I'm saying. Your decision making and your behavior matters.
I
And
agree.
not for anything. Over time, certain things that she did in her life led her to that situation. Whether it was, I'm not saying that what happened to her wasn't awful or tragic or
So, but you're
anything.
saying it was her fault.
No.
And even like if Breonna Taylor was actually involved in drugs, I still don't think that would justify her getting killed in her home. When initially when I read this, I did think that this was much more of a trying to justify what happened to Breonna Taylor.
The fact is, the left has no case when it comes to Breonna Taylor. That's why these lefties always resort to moral grandstanding every time you bring up factual points about the case. They always revert when they hear a point that they don't want to hear to you're justifying it, you're saying it's justified, even though pointing out that it's non-criminal is not the same as justifying it. Something can be a wrongful death. And again, if you're misleading about the facts and I'm correcting you, that's not justifying it. That's just pointing out that you're incredibly dishonest or incredibly stupid.
Is
That's
wrong.
a tragedy. Of course, it's wrong, but it's not murder.
Okay. Well, I mean, you can okay, you can call it what you want. You can call it what you want, but I think
Well,
that
no, murder is a specific thing. There's intent there. Nobody
Right.
intended to kill her.
That's fair. That's fair. It might be a manslaughter charge. I think that it could constitute maybe not murder, yeah, because it requires
intent.
intent, but
Mhm.
it could possibly fall under a manslaughter charge because excuse me, the fact
Yeah,
that
the vehicular manslaughter, it's not intentional, but reckless endangerment kind of thing.
yeah, I think that's the charge that they should face then.
Anytime you get somebody to retreat to a faux moderate position, this false middle ground, that's how you know you have them beat. See, Hunter realized that Lisa is aware that murder is a crime with a very specific definition. There's a general definition that this definitely doesn't fall under, but there's also a specific definition under Kentucky's code. Now, Hunter says, okay, you know what, like he's negotiating for a car. Murder's too high. Let me bring it down to manslaughter. I'm going to compromise with you there. Don't you think it at least fits on the manslaughter charges? I mean, manslaughter's less than murder. I agree it's not murder. I'm not unreasonable. I just brought the price down. But what about manslaughter? Don't you think it's at least manslaughter? Meanwhile, manslaughter is also a very specific crime defined under Kentucky law. And this, in no way, shape, or form, falls under manslaughter charges. Hunter, you have no idea what you're talking about when it comes to law. Look up the law, see if it fits. If it doesn't fit, that charge is not being applied.
But I don't think it's entirely fair to be like, well, you don't shoot it. Like the police shot. I mean, you shot at the police. Like, how was he to know they were the police?
It doesn't. It's like that point. That is the point that's irrelevant, right?
How so?
These people are so lacking in self-awareness that they don't even realize that they are making the case for the officers, the exact thing that defends the officers when they're talking about Kenneth Walker, when they're saying that Kenneth Walker was acting in self-defense based on the information that he had available to him at the time. That is exactly what the officers were doing. They were executing a legal, legitimate search warrant on the correct house. When the officer entered the threshold, he was shot. He was shot while executing a legal search warrant, and he shot back at the person who shot him. This is an open and shut case. Both parties were acting with the information they had in a reasonable and legal way. That's why Kenneth Walker's not facing charges, and that's why the officers aren't facing charges. That's why the officer that is facing charges is the one who acted recklessly because he did so in an unreasonable way. He shot into another person's apartment because he completely lost his cool and spazzed out. But the Breonna Taylor shooting, she was right next to Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker fired at an officer, nicked him in his femoral artery. He almost bled to death, and it's perfectly reasonable for an officer to shoot back. This is legitimately the least complicated issue of all time. And no party is criminally liable for their actions because they both acted reasonably with the information that they had. This is why you have to make up all this other stuff about the police not announcing themselves. They weren't obligated to even knock. They knocked. It didn't matter whether or not they announced themselves. They happened to have announced themselves, as I've proven throughout the course of this video, but it's not relevant. It doesn't change the fact that they were serving a legitimate warrant, and upon entry, immediately upon entry, one of the officers was shot, and he shot back at the person who shot at him while he was serving a warrant. They act like the not announcing is the key component that makes it manslaughter or murder. It doesn't. That's not how any of this works. They talk about the no uniforms and the cops were in plain clothes. First of all, the cops were wearing vests that said police. Second of all, the prosecution is not charging Kenneth Walker with shooting the cop. They are not disputing that Kenneth Walker was operating based on the best information available. So why are you bringing that up as if it has any relevance? As if the cops not being in the blues somehow makes this a murder? These people have no clue what they're talking about. I don't know how much I have to emphasize this. No clue whatsoever.
They also lied on the incident report. After they had killed her, they listed her injuries as none, even though she'd been shot multiple times, and they indicated that officers had not forced their way into the apartment. So I think that's a little shady too.
The cops actually should have executed this warrant as a no-knock warrant. Had they done that, Kenneth Walker would not have had time to grab his gun and shoot the officer in the leg. And also, the idea that the police are somehow retroactively guilty of manslaughter or murder or any other crime because they misfilled out paperwork, according to Hunter, is absolutely ridiculous. First of all, there's two explanations for why the police report said no forced entry. Number one, they didn't really fully break down the door when they tried to serve the warrant. They were able to crack it open. Mattingly went in, got shot in the femoral artery, shot back, and was pulled back out through the threshold. At this point, it became a shooting battle, not a break down the door battle. So it's actually technically accurate that when Kenneth Walker surrendered to the police officers, he came out under his own accord. The police did not have to break in and get him. Number two, an officer was shot in the femoral artery. Pardon me for not filling out my paperwork the absolute best possible way as I bleed to death. It is very likely that they were more concerned with what they believe to be an active shooter situation, a potential hostage situation, and an officer that was on the verge of dying. So maybe another officer not really involved in the raid was filling out the report about his partner getting shot, and that's why that information was left inaccurate. Again, we're talking about a check of a box. Like, this mistake is obvious, and it's not criminal on top of that. Because again, they could have easily broken down the door without any problem. The warrant specifically authorized that behavior. Them checking the box doesn't do anything except put questions in the minds of stupid people who don't realize that hectic situations don't always have time for paperwork. Now that's pretty much it for the Breonna Taylor portion of this debate. Like I said, I will be linking to Lisa's social media in the description of this video. Definitely check her out and congratulate her for her performance. I'll also leave the unlisted link so you guys can watch it in full. And if you want a part 2, let me know in the comments down below where I'll go over all the ridiculous, regressive, paternalistically racist stuff Hunter says about black people in this country. I think it's fascinating, but I wanted to take it in order. Again, let me know your thoughts, blah, blah, blah. Comments down below. Obviously, like the video showing by leaving a like, subscribe for more content if you want to support me. Patreon now has annual memberships. It's pretty dope, and some people have signed up, really appreciate it. But this has been me going over this debate. Till next time.